Now we're going to talk about the role of processes as it relates to supply chain management and logistics. So we've seen this particular slide before, so we don't have to go through each and every one, the supplier, the origin trucker, the origin forwarder. We want to reiterate the importance of visibility from a planning perspective and execution perspective across the supply chain, reiterate that many, and in some instances all of these players, are third parties in an outsourced environment. So how do we, as an importer or an exporter or a manufacturer, manage that sometimes unwieldy supply chain? Well, the answer partially is in process design. So things like, how do we map out the process for customs clearance when goods arrive from overseas? How do we map out the process of utilizing ocean freight transportation versus air freight transportation? The entire process of order fulfillment. We're running a 1 million square foot warehouse here in Southern California out in the Inland Empire. What is the process, the physical process, and how do we execute when we're receiving 2,000, 3,000 orders a day? We could go on about process examples, and we will do that, as I said, in subsequent modules, but I think those examples suffice to illustrate just how important processes are, understanding how they work, what are the inputs into a process that create an output, and how do we use them to our advantage in specific tactical situations. So, another definition, supply chain and logistics processes. So what we're talking about here, starting at the very beginning, is a structured, measurable set of activities. Maybe it's related to a customs clearance process. Maybe it's a warehouse management process. For now, it doesn't matter. This is a general definition. But it's a measurable set of activities and tasks where we're trying to produce a specified output. That output could be a completed order to a customer for an e-commerce purchase. We're looking for an output, a result of our activities for a particular customer or market. Outputs are driven by inputs. This is a theme that you'll hear repeatedly through all of our modules. One of the key essence of processes is that the output is determined by the input, and maybe it's products themselves, maybe it's the manpower component, maybe it's physical plants, our factories and warehouses, the technology that we use. It's more than likely a combination of all of the above, but those are the inputs that create an output. And the beauty of a process is that we can use specific amounts of each input to influence the quality of the output. So our processes are designed to satisfy the needs of both internal and external clients. We've not used that terminology yet. What do you mean by internal and external client? Important point to make, and we'll stop here briefly to elaborate. An external client are the customers that buy our products, our services, the people that come into our stores, the people that go online and buy our products. That's the client, that's the customer. But also, if you think about it, from an integrated perspective, and certainly in a logistics environment, we have internal customers within our organization and enterprise. For example, do the purchasing people depend upon the logistics function to get goods moving in the right quantities and at the right time? Definitely, that's an example of an internal client. Do we all in an organization depend on the IT department to make sure that our hardware and software runs correctly? Most definitely. Those are examples of internal and external clients. And proper supply chain and logistic process design contemplates the needs of both constituencies. Second paragraph, quickly. A process really has two characteristics: the primary output and service requirements. And I think this fits in nicely with our subsequent conversations on the element of customer service as it relates to supply chain management. So we're trying to accomplish a goal. Generate an order that's complete and in good condition and on time, but also there's a service requirement around that. The primary output is the direct result of the process inputs, as we said, a finished product, service, or order. While the service requirement are those value-added elements that surround the primary output: communication, follow-up, technical support, getting a correct invoice out with the product, and customer service along the way. So as we design processes, especially in a supply chain and logistics environment, we want to be thinking about internal customers, external customers, what's our primary output, what's our specific goal, and how do we build a service element around that. So the combination of the primary output and service requirement is what we like to refer to as the customer experience, the overall feeling that an external or an internal customer gets as a result of coming in contact and doing business with our organization. So let's talk a little bit about business characteristics, or I should say business process characteristics. Number one, because we're so sensitive to that internal and external customer element, everything that we do from a process perspective, it has to be a reflection of the voice of the client. So have a clear understanding of what the customer, whoever that might be, is looking for, and provide that service and or product. The process, the steps in a process, they have to create value. Now this is a kind of nebulous term, value. What does value mean? Well, of course, there's a monetary value, and you might characterize it as any activity in a process that people, customers, are willing to pay for. And as you review existing processes, one good way to approach that is to look at each step in the existing process, or even in a new process design, and say, does this step create process? If the customer knew that we were doing this, would they be willing to pay for it? That's a good measure to measure value. They are indeed measurable, business process characteristics, and they always have a beginning and the end. And because there is a beginning and an end to a process, they are intended to be reproduced consistently, not in a linear fashion where you have to kind of reinvent the wheel every time you create an order, for example, but circular, which means it can be done over and over and over again. Honestly, a lot of supply chain, a lot of logistics is about repetitiveness, handling thousands of shipments a day or hundreds of customer inquiries, this type of thing. So you don't want it to be linear, start, finish, start all over again, start, finish, start all over again, but repeatable and reproducible in a circular fashion. Some other characteristics, and this is consistent with some of the things we've mentioned already. They are typically involving several internal and external departments and or entities. Think about a customer order or the purchase of raw materials for a production scenario. You're involving order management, purchasing, logistics, finance, accounting. So we're not just looking at logistics processes per se, for example, but all of the other functional areas that may influence or be influenced by what's going on in that process. So you want to have a broader functional frame of reference, which is to say you're considering these other areas within an enterprise. Reality is that processes are never perfect and can always be improved. That's why we like to map out existing processes and look for ways to continuously improve them. Talked a little bit about inputs that create outputs. This is very consistent with bullet point number 3. Processes are based on cause and effect relationships. And that's just another way of saying that the output is influenced by the input. So we have to determine what it is we're trying to create, a flawless product coming off of a production line, for example, and determine what the inputs are that go into that: labor, machinery, raw materials, etc. Cause and effect relationships are very much the same thing as outputs being created by the inputs. That's a theme that will come up over and over again throughout our entire course. If you think about this idea of an internal customer, especially in a business environment where purchasing depends upon logistics and accounting depends upon sales for customer credit information, as another example, one person's output automatically becomes another person's input. So a salesperson shows up with an order for a customer in Spain. They provide credit information to the accounting department. That's one person's output. The salesperson shows up with the order and the credit information, automatically becomes another person's input. In this case, the accounting department, the people that are going to check the credit worthiness of the customer. This is an important way to look at things. Inputs create outputs. This is a simple but important slide because I think it helps to illustrate what we're talking about here. This whole cause and effect relationship where outputs are a function of inputs. Some very simple, I wouldn't even call it math. There's some mathematical symbology here, but it's certainly not math. But in the world of calculus, X represents inputs and Y represents output. And Y, the output, capital uppercase Y in red, is a function of X. And what that means is that's just the way calculus people say that outputs are a function of inputs. The results of a process depend upon the inputs. So if you look at a customer experience in our rectangle here, could be any process in the middle bright white area, could be any type of process. That's the beauty, the simplicity of this image is such that you can plug in any type of process, and it forces us to think and identify what's the output of this process and what are the elements of manpower, moving counterclockwise, methodology, how we do things, what are the products that go into, perhaps raw materials, into a production process, what are the physical plant requirements, could be a warehouse, again, a factory, and what is the environment, not environmental green considerations, although very important. We're talking about the operating environment, all of the players in the supply chain that we talked about just a little bit. So this is a simplistic representation, but drives home this idea as it relates to processes about outputs being a function of inputs and identifying what those inputs are to create a process that maximizes the probability of gaining the outcome that we desire.